one more box up here to finish.
Good.
Rita, would you mind turning on the lights? It's getting kind of dark. Thank you.
Yeah, it's getting kind of late, too. You know something? I better go home. I promised Norma I'd cook him some fish chowder tonight. Mom's recipe.
Sounds good. Well, all right, Madame, you are dismissed. I would not want to be the cause of your domestic crisis.
Thanks a lot. I'll be back tomorrow. Same time, same place?
Yes, we'll be able to finish all this up so Eli can show the place.
Great.
Well, that can't be the movers. I told them I'd call them when I needed them.
I'll get it on the way out.
All right.
Stephen, what are you doing here?
Hello, Rita. What's up, Betty? Car outside?
Rita, who is it?
It's Stephen.
This is Miss Ivers, Rita Harrington.
How do you do? Hello.
And this is Mrs. Rodney Harrington. And Betty, this is Jennifer Ivers.
How do you do?
Look, Stephen, as you can see, I am very busy, and it's going to be a long drive for me back to Boston.
Well, I realize that, but Miss Ivers has made 2 trips from Boston just to see the 2 of us together. Now, you were tied up yesterday, remember? You might spare us a few minutes.
Betty, I really have to go. I'll see you tomorrow, okay? It was nice meeting you.
Rita?
Bye.
Look, Stephen, I thought I explained everything quite clearly. I am not going to challenge that will anymore. I'm sorry to bore you with all this, but I think your trip here was for absolutely nothing.
Look, let's just hear what she has to say. Now, whatever it is, we'll both be hearing it for the first time.
As usual, I see I have no choice with you, do I, Stephen?
All right, tell us everything you remember about the time you spent with Mr. Peyton at the clinic.
Well, it's difficult to know where to begin.
You were Mr. Peyton's special nurse, isn't that correct?
Not at first. He had specials round the clock. I was assigned as a relief nurse on their day off.
Oh, and one of the reliefs must have left, and you replaced her on a permanent basis.
Well, Mr. Peyton fired her. I took over her duties. He insisted on having me.
Why was that?
I don't know. The first time I walked in his room, he looked at me in a funny sort of way. And then he said I reminded him of someone.
Did he say who?
Not that day. Not until later.
When was that?
The day he notified the head nurse that he wanted her to find me a room at the clinic. He wanted me to live in at his expense. He wanted me to be on duty at all times. Well, the clinic tried to talk him out of it, chief administrator himself, but Mr. Peyton sent him packing. He said his job was to order light bulbs and count bed sheets, and he should go away and let him do his dying in peace.
Yeah, it sounds like my grandfather. Well, what was the upshot? Who won?
They made a compromise. They gave me a room. They said I could have visiting privileges on my off hours. They knew he was dying, so they humored him. He said all he needed was Catherine.
Catherine?
Yes, he said he wanted to spend as much of his time as he could with his daughter.
Oh, in other words, he confused you with his daughter, who's been dead several years.
At first, I thought he was just an eccentric old man, you know, trying to amuse himself. But then I realized there were times when he actually thought I was his daughter.
What did you tell him? That you weren't Catherine, that you weren't his daughter, that you were just his nurse?
What would you do? I humored him. It seemed harmless enough. He was just a lonely old man. He just wanted someone he could feel close to, someone he could talk to.
Well, then you were in an excellent position to observe his behavior up to the time of his death.
I was with him more than anyone else.
Aside from this thing about his daughter, would you say he acted in a normal manner?
Most of the time. But there were days. Of course, I'm not an expert.
Well, I think you're qualified to comment on your patient's behavior.
Well, I've seen a lot of eccentric behavior, especially among older patients, but I'd never encountered anyone quite like Mr. Peyton. Boy, he was something. He couldn't sleep. Sometimes he'd have the night nurse wake me up in the middle of the night. I'd get up, go down to his suite. I'd never know what kind of mood he'd be in, what I'd encounter, whether I'd be Jennifer or Catherine or even Betty. Sometimes he'd really chew me out. He'd say, "Catherine, where have you been? You're out very late tonight. Who are you with?" Then he'd accuse me of all kinds of things, and I'd have to calm him down. Well, other times he'd ramble on about things that happened 20 and 30 years ago, and then get angry because I couldn't remember. Sometimes he'd insist on dictating letters in the middle of the night. He'd write to high government officials, dignitaries, people like that. Well, I'd just fake it because they either were dead or hadn't been in office for years.
Were there any other times that he appeared disoriented?
One time he had me call the maitre d' at the Carlton. He told me to ask for a Monsieur Anatole. They said he'd been gone for years, but that didn't stop Mr. Peyton. He took the phone, he ordered the meal, in French, I believe, had it sent over to the clinic. Well, when it arrived, he not only refused to eat it, but he denied he'd ever ordered it. He sort of slipped in and out. You know what I mean? Sometimes he'd be perfectly rational. Other times, watch out. I guess it was because he was so uptight about money and what it meant to him.
Uptight?
Maybe confused is a better word, or obsessed. He talked about it all the time. He quoted things in Greek or from Shakespeare, things about immortality. I couldn't understand half the things he said, but what it boiled down to was the fact that he couldn't make up his mind.
About what?
About who or what to leave it to. All that money and power. Who'd carry on his name, his memory. I guess it was very difficult for a man like Mr. Peyton to realize that it had to end, even for him.
Did he ever discuss the will with you?
Which one?
You mean there were others?
He must have dictated 2 or 3 before he decided on the last one, the one I signed as a witness.
Well, the other drafts, do you know where they are?
We burned them right in his room. We probably would have burned the last one, too. He changed his mind so many times, but his attorney took charge of it, and that was the end of it.
You mean Mr. Wainwright?
Although I don't know. Maybe he wouldn't. Mr. Wainwright and Mr. Peyton used to argue about the estate all the time.
Well, were you present when these arguments occurred?
No, but I could hear them. There was a woman who used to visit Mr. Peyton also, a Mrs. Cord. Is she...
What about Mrs. Cord?
She seemed to be pressuring Mr. Peyton about the money also. Oh, dear, I'm sorry. I'm afraid I have to leave. I have to catch the bus.
Well, that's okay. I'll drive you back. If you wouldn't mind waiting in the car for a minute.
It was nice meeting you, Mrs. Harrington. I hope I didn't take up too much of your time.
No, not at all. Goodbye.
Well, what do you think?
Where did you find her?
Find her?
An advertisement in the paper. Wanted, one witness, young, beautiful, convincing. You know, that Catherine Angle was very clever, very convincing.
Now, you really don't think she was a fraud. You don't think I'd be such a fool as to risk disbarment by setting up a perjured witness? You know me better than that, Betty. Now, look, she'll break the will for us on the grounds that the old man was totally incompetent.
I told you, Stephen, I want nothing to do with this.
Really? Well, somebody is going to win that jackpot. And Jennifer Ivers just handed us the winning ticket. Now, before you throw it away, think about it. Long and hard.
I don't think I made too much of an impression on Mrs. Harrington.
Well, she may not have seemed impressed because that's not the way the game's played. But I was. She'll come around.
Preview from the continuing story of Peyton Place.
My feelings toward you are totally selfish.
You want me around when you want me around.
Susan!
If you interfere in any way with Carolyn and her classes, I'll get a court order out to stop you. Fred, she is in my custody.
Obviously, you don't care who she runs around with.
Get out of here.